Breaking news tonight: tensions in the Middle East are rapidly escalating as new developments suggest a dangerous shift behind ongoing negotiations. Reports indicate that Iran is preparing significant military capabilities, raising concerns in both United States and Israel. While diplomatic talks continue behind closed doors, activity on the ground tells a different story, one marked by heightened alert and strategic positioning. With a critical deadline approaching, global attention is now focused on whether this situation will de-escalate or move closer to open conflict. We'll break down what's happening, what's at stake, and what could come next, right now. The night sky above the Strait of Hormuz stretched endlessly, dark and heavy, as though it carried the burden of everything that might soon unfold beneath it. There was no wind, no restless waves, only a strange, suffocating stillness that didn't belong to nature. It was the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. Below, the narrow waterway, one of the most critical arteries of global energy, became a stage where the fate of nations quietly balanced on a razor's edge. Warships moved with deliberate caution, their silhouettes barely visible against the Black Sea, like predators circling in a world where even the smallest sound could trigger catastrophe. Scattered across the horizon, massive oil tankers drifted slowly, their lights glowing like distant constellations trapped on water. These vessels carried more than oil. They carried the weight of economies, the stability of markets, and the fragile dependence of millions of lives across the globe. Yet in this moment, they looked vulnerable, almost defenseless, caught between powerful forces beyond their control. Every flicker of light could be mistaken for a signal, every movement interpreted as a threat. The crews on board worked in tense silence, aware that they were no longer just transporting cargo, they were navigating through the invisible fault line of a potential war. Beneath the calm surface of the sea, tension tightened like a coiled spring ready to snap. This was not chaos. This was controlled pressure, carefully managed, dangerously contained. Military systems on both sides monitored every frequency, every movement, every anomaly. Satellites passed overhead, feeding constant streams of data to command centers thousands of miles away. In this environment, certainty did not exist, only probabilities and risks. A radar glitch, a misread signal, or a delayed response could escalate into something irreversible. The line between defense and aggression had become so thin that even the most disciplined forces operated on the edge of unintended conflict. Nearly 60 days had passed since Donald Trump initiated the formal notification that activated the countdown under the War Powers Resolution. What began as a procedural step had evolved into a looming deadline that now dictated the rhythm of decisions at the highest levels of power. Every passing day narrowed the space for diplomacy while amplifying the urgency of action. The law, designed to limit executive authority, had instead become a strategic variable, interpreted, debated, and maneuvered within political and military calculations. The question was no longer just about legality, but about timing, perception, and the consequences of either compliance or defiance. In Washington, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Behind closed doors, voices rose and fell in intense debates that blended legal arguments with political survival. Advisors, generals, and lawmakers wrestled with options that carried no easy outcomes. Some pushed for restraint, warning of escalation and global backlash. Others argued that hesitation could project weakness, and invite greater threats. Every decision was layered with uncertainty, influenced by public opinion, alliances, and the unpredictable reactions of adversaries. Beneath the surface of strategy and policy, there was a shared understanding. Whatever choice was made would not just shape the present moment, but define the course of history that followed. In Tehran, far from the open waters, yet deeply connected to every movement within them, a network of fortified command centers pulsed with quiet intensity. Buried beneath layers of reinforced concrete and rock, these underground facilities were designed not just for protection, but for endurance. Inside, the air was cool, controlled, and filled with the low hum of machines processing streams of real-time intelligence. Large digital maps covered the walls, tracking naval positions, airspace activity, and satellite feeds with precision. Iranian commanders stood in still focus, their discipline masking the gravity of the situation. They were not reacting. They were waiting. Years of preparation had conditioned them for moments like this, where patience could be more powerful than immediate action. On the deck of a U.S. aircraft carrier cutting through the dark waters, Commander Harris remained fixed on the horizon. The faint glow of distant vessels reflected in his eyes as he stood motionless, absorbing the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Around him, crew members moved with rehearsed efficiency, each action part of a larger system designed for rapid response. But Harris understood something deeper. This was not just another deployment or routine mission. This was a threshold. The kind of moment where decisions made in seconds could spiral into consequences lasting decades. He carried not only the authority of command, but also the burden of restraint in a situation where escalation was always one step away. "Status?" Harris asked, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the controlled noise of the command deck. The question was simple, but its implications were not. Instantly, data began to flow in. Coordinates, signals, unidentified movements, all translated into actionable intelligence within seconds. The crew responded with precision, their training evident in the speed and clarity of their communication. Yet beneath the professionalism, there was tension. Everyone understood that each update could bring them closer to a point of no return. In modern warfare, information was as critical as firepower, and every piece of data carried the potential to trigger a chain reaction. "Enemy drone detected. Distance 120 kilometers, came the response, sharp and unmistakable. The words hung in the air, immediately shifting the atmosphere from tense observation to active alert. On the radar screen, a small signal blinked steadily, almost insignificant in size, but its presence changed everything. Identification systems scrambled to classify it, cross-referencing known patterns and potential threats. The drone's trajectory suggested intent, but intent was never certain. Was it reconnaissance, a test of defenses, or something far more dangerous? The ambiguity made it more threatening than a confirmed attack, because it forced commanders to decide without complete clarity. The drone itself was small, barely more than a speck against the vastness of the sky, but in the context of modern warfare, size had lost its meaning. What mattered was capability. These machines, often inexpensive and easily deployable, had redefined the nature of conflict. They could observe, strike, and disappear with minimal warning, turning even the most advanced defenses into reactive systems. As it moved steadily closer, its presence became symbolic of a larger shift in warfare, one where precision, adaptability, and unpredictability outweighed sheer power. For those tracking it, the drone was not just a target. It was a question waiting to be answered, with consequences that could extend far beyond its small frame. Across the region, deep within a fortified Iranian bunker, a senior general stood before a wall of synchronized displays, each one feeding him fragments of a rapidly evolving picture. The room was dim, illuminated only by shifting lights and data streams that painted moving patterns across his face. He observed everything: the drone trajectories, naval formations, satellite overlays, with an intensity sharpened by years of experience. Unlike the chaos that outsiders might imagine, the atmosphere here was disciplined, almost methodical. Every officer knew their role, every signal was analyzed, every movement recorded. This was not a place of panic. It was a place of calculation. The general understood that in a conflict like this, control over information could be as decisive as control over firepower. "Let them come closer," he said quietly, his voice steady and deliberate. The order was not driven by hesitation, but by strategy. Engaging too early could reveal defensive positions, expose capabilities, and shift the advantage. Waiting, however, allowed patterns to emerge, intentions to become clearer. His command reflected a doctrine built on patience and asymmetry, where time itself could be weaponized. Around him, his staff exchanged brief glances, but did not question the decision. They understood the logic. In a confrontation defined by uncertainty, restraint could create opportunities that aggression would destroy. The general's confidence was not arrogance. It was rooted in preparation, in the belief that the battlefield favored those who controlled its tempo. The clock continued its relentless march forward. Day 58 had arrived, and with it came a weight that could be felt across continents. The sense of approaching inevitability grew stronger with every passing hour. In command centers, embassies, and intelligence hubs, the same realization settled in. There were fewer and fewer options left that didn't carry significant risk. Communication lines remained open, but the tone had shifted. Urgency replaced diplomacy's usual patience. Even small developments were magnified, interpreted as signals of what might come next. It was no longer just about preventing conflict. It was about managing how close the world could come to the edge without falling over. In the background of rising tension, diplomatic channels flickered with renewed activity. Messages were sent, proposals drafted, and intermediaries engaged in quiet, behind-the-scenes efforts to slow the momentum toward escalation. Among those stepping forward was Vladimir Putin, positioning himself as a potential mediator in a conflict that threatened global stability. His outreach carried both opportunity and calculation, an attempt to de-escalate while also reinforcing strategic influence. Yet diplomacy, by nature, moved at a different pace than military readiness. While negotiators spoke in measured tones, forces on the ground continued to prepare. Systems remained active, and the possibility of confrontation never faded. Words, no matter how carefully chosen, struggled to keep up with the speed of unfolding events. Day 59 brought a moment that, on the surface, seemed minor, but in this fragile environment, even the smallest incident carried immense weight. A commercial oil tanker navigating the narrow passage came dangerously close to a military patrol vessel. The distance between them shrank to a point where alarms were triggered and immediate evasive actions were taken. No collision occurred, No weapons were fired, but the near miss sent ripples through command structures on both sides. Reports flooded in, each offering slightly different interpretations of what had happened. Was it an accident, a misjudgment, or a deliberate test? The lack of clarity made it more dangerous than a confirmed act. For a brief moment, the world stood at the edge of escalation, not because of a planned attack, but because of how easily control could slip away. The near incident sent a surge of urgency through every operational layer. Across fleets and fortified command rooms, alarms shattered the fragile silence, cutting through disciplined calm with mechanical precision. Systems that had been quietly monitoring now shifted into active readiness. Defense protocols activated in rapid succession, missile systems aligned, targeting arrays recalibrated, communication channel flooded with coded transmissions. Personnel moved with trained efficiency, but the pace had changed. This was no longer observation. This was preparation. Every movement carried a sharpened edge. Every command executed with the awareness that hesitation could be costly, but overreaction could be catastrophic. The line between caution and action began to blur, dissolving into a tense, uncertain grey. Above the dark waters, the sky transformed into an invisible battlefield. Drones emerged in increasing numbers, small, fast, and difficult to track, appearing on radar screens as clusters of uncertain intent. What had once been a single signal now multiplied into a swarm, forcing operators to prioritize, classify, and decide in seconds. Each blip represented a possibility: surveillance, decoy, or strike capability. The complexity of the situation escalated rapidly, overwhelming even advanced systems designed to maintain clarity under pressure. In command centers, analysts worked relentlessly, their eyes scanning data streams that changed by the second. The battlefield was no longer defined by what could be seen, but by what could be interpreted and misinterpreted. Day 60 arrived without ceremony, but its presence was unmistakable. The deadline had been reached. In both United States and Iran, decision-makers stood at a critical junction where every option carried irreversible consequences. The legal constraints, the political pressures, and the military realities all converged into a single moment of truth. There was no longer room for delay without intent. Action, or deliberate inaction, would define the next phase. The world, though distant, was connected to this moment, watching through the lens of global consequence. Markets waited, allies calculated, and adversaries observed, each anticipating a shift that could ripple far beyond the immediate conflict zone. On the aircraft carrier, Commander Harris focused on the target now locked within the system. The interface before him displayed precision, coordinates, trajectory, probability, all reduced to a decision point that rested in his hands. His finger hovered near the command input, suspended between duty and restraint. Around him, the air felt heavier, as if time itself had slowed to witness the choice. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, each one amplifying the magnitude of what could follow. He understood the chain reaction that a single command could unleash, not just in the immediate strike, but in the responses that would inevitably follow. There would be no simple resolution once that line was crossed. Then, without warning, everything shifted. A message broke through the tension, transmitted across secured channels with unmistakable clarity. "Stand down!" The words carried a weight equal to any command to engage. Systems paused, movement slowed, and a collective stillness returned. different from before, but no less profound. A fragile agreement had been reached through last-minute diplomatic efforts, halting the immediate path toward confrontation. It was not a victory, nor a resolution, but a temporary suspension of what had nearly begun. Across ships, bunkers, and command centers, a quiet release of tension followed. Yet beneath that relief lingered a shared understanding. This was not an ending, it was a pause. The forces, the strategies, and the unresolved tensions remained in place, waiting for whatever would come next.